There are opposing views on whether the EFF's planned shutdown will have the intended impact on the country. The Red Berets will take to the streets on Monday to demand an end to load shedding and unemployment, as well as President Cyril Ramaphosa's resignation. Several opposition parties believe the protest will do more harm than good. Let's get some analysis now, and we're joined by political analyst Dr Ongama Mtimka, who talks to us from Gqeberha. Dr Mtimka, thank you very much for your time. We have had many protests in this country, and let's start with that intention of the EFF. So they are marching for an end to load shedding. They are marching for more jobs to be created so that there is less and less unemployment, but also importantly, President Cyril Ramaphosa's resignation. Have many of these protests achieved what their demands have been?
Good morning to you, Tolly, and your viewers. Thank you for having me this morning. So protests as a form of political activity are important because it is a stage or a political stage that's created by the actor, uninvited by the elites in order to profile issues. And I think that to the extent that they are able to generate a national conversation and also, the theatrics of the protest itself are able to profile issues, protests are successful. We're a kind of society that doesn't listen until people precipitate a crisis. And unfortunately, given the culture of the 1980s, where these protests, there's a feeling that a protest hasn't been successful unless somebody has burned a tire or caused one disturbance or another. We continue to have that in South Africa. A community will protest and maybe it will not make national news until somebody burns something. And that's something which we should not allow to fester. In fact, we've allowed to fester for a long time. The part where it is acts of, disturbances, major disturbances that cause us to pay attention, when we should in fact pay attention when people are still raising issues, ordinarily.
Yeah.
So in general terms, Tony, protests do work as far as profiling issues and also creating a sense of urgency and panic. A colleague of mine, Dr Nyasha Mboti, writes about how we tend in South Africa to normalize crisis and pain and run towards it rather than away from it and tolerate it, as opposed to doing something that shows that we are uncomfortable with living in crisis.
A very nice way to actually open this conversation, because I take from your words now when you say protests precipitate a crisis. And I want to pose that question on the back of the man we have just listened to, former President Thabo Mbeki, who was asked about this impending protest march by the EFF, and he says, Julius Malema explained that this is going to be a peaceful protest, and if anything goes awry, then obviously he must be held accountable. But for now, it is every right of a South African to take to the streets to demonstrate over whatever it is that they are complaining about. Is it an overreaction from the Ramaphosa administration? We've just had Bheki Cele conducting a parade, and the understanding is that the same is being done in other parts of the country. Is this an overreaction from President Ramaphosa and his ministers?
So what I was saying, by the way, is that protests are a form of precipitating a crisis in order to address a crisis that is actually taken for granted as normal. Yes, my view is that both the assurance by the EFF, first of all, the response by the stakeholders, such as Democratic Alliance and others, who have been concerned about attempts to intimidate businesses, attempts to ground airlines, alleged attempts to ground airlines, were justified because nobody has got a right to acts of sabotage, even as the right to protest is guaranteed. So my sense is that I would rather have a state that is prepared to clamp down on acts of violence than one that will be sorry that they were not. So all of these things can be true at the same time. You can have a Julius Malema who gets caught out by people, or whose party gets caught out by people in advance trying to plan acts of sabotage in order to elevate the importance of the march or the effect of the march, and then coming to give reassurance and have the state prepare for a situation in which there may be a crisis that breaks out. Only we can no longer tolerate in the country insurrectionist tendencies, even as the state should tread carefully not to create a posture that they will be intolerant to South Africans marching peacefully. All of these contradictions can exist at the same time. The EFF can have its right to march, but also raise a potential threat of social disturbance that borders on sabotage. And the state must be prepared for that.
How much of this protest march planned for Monday, Dr. Mtimka, is a test run of the EFF's election machinery? And what will be the test of the success of this impending protest?
Sure. I've deliberately, by the way, didn't speak to what I think may be the intentions of the EFF with this march. Obviously, they are not going to get any of the outcomes that they have put up there. The president is not going to resign next week. The load shedding issue, I'm happy that there's a sense in which people are becoming serious about availing, electricity. Whether that's a function of an imminent threat of a march or not, that's a debate for another day. But coming to your point about the election machinery of the EFF, the EFF, and I will write this, by the way, in a paper that's coming out pretty soon. The EFF have always mastered the art of grievance. Some looked negatively, one would say grievance exploitation, or looked positively foregrounding the issues of grievance at a national level and exploring unconventional ways of dealing with them in order to ensure that power does not reside completely within the governing party, but is in the system itself. So, for example, introducing chaos in parliament was not the desirable thing, but you needed it when you had a governing party that was abusing its dominance in the National Assembly to upset that kind of comfort with, their approach. Now you have a party that is represented in the nation in various legislatures and councils in the country, resorting to protest. One may argue that this is part of the posturing ahead of the election and an attempt to actually win more hearts and minds of South Africans in line with this strategy of presenting the party as very radical. Or it may simply be people who have read the mood, that South Africans are tired of the chaos, the multiple crises that we are facing, and therefore are presenting some political, capital to try and do something about it. And I think it's something that should be done, Tony. I'm strongly behind this initiative to march, notwithstanding my reservations about generally untrue intentions by politicians. Yeah. I'm strongly behind this attempt to say enough is enough. We can't actually be living with crisis in this way and have a sweetheart relationship with the state.
Dr. Mtimka, we have less than a minute left, and I've got to ask this question. It's directly linked to what former President Thabo Mbeki was asked about at the gathering. And the question to him is whether he believes there is a link between South Africa's grey listing and the yet-to-be-concluded Phala Phala scandal. And his response is in the affirmative, that their reference, I'm picking his words now, their reference is correct. So, here's my question to you. The march on Monday is also going to be about President Cyril Ramaphosa's resignation, the demand that he resigns. How big a test is that as to just how hurtful, to put it in South African terms, how hurtful South Africans are towards him as president of the country?
Sure. I think that while I share the sentiment, I've always maintained that Phala Phala is scandalous, full stop. The extent to which the president is culpable, the extent to which is directly responsible, it has been what we have been waiting for investigating authorities to confirm. And I think that that's still something that's out there. And I don't think that as a result of Phala Phala itself, the president's credibility has come to a point where there's a demand for his resignation. But a demand for his resignation on the basis of accountability is one of the things that I once said, but I doubt that politically his popularity as a result of that issue has come to a point where the only way forward is him resigning, even though I was the first to write that he should resign as soon as the scandal surfaced, even long before the Section 89 report. My view, though, is that the issues of state failure have got a greater weight for the president to consider a different order, completely different order of leadership as far as the ANC and therefore the state is concerned. Anything of him resigning, but the entire grouping that has been there since the 1990s remaining will have no change whatsoever. The ANC, if it was serious, should have done a wholesale change of most of the leaders who are in parliament and at the level of the state, if they were serious about presenting something different to South Africans come next year. And as a result of failing to do that, they're going to be punished.
Dr. Ongama Mtimka, thank you very much for your time.